Hello, everyone. It's Thomas Logan here, coming to you from Tokyo, Japan in the afternoon now. And good morning to those of you in Europe, and maybe good, very late night in America, wherever you're streaming from. Welcome back to Inclusive Design 2021. So today's event is brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Intopia, Fable, Arc, and Adobe, and our Gold supporter, Tetralogical. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, CONF. And if you have questions for our presenter in this session, please tweet them using the hashtag ID24. Those questions will be included in the Q&A at the end of our session. So I'm very happy to be joined by my guest host, Bryn Anderson. Bryn, over to you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I didn't know you were in Japan. That's very exciting. So from Japan to London, hello, everyone. Good morning for those of you in Europe waking up. And yeah, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm delighted to be presenting Pratishtha Sharma to you to talk about the starting point towards inclusive design. Which I mean, you know, we certainly hear a lot about inclusive design this, inclusive design that, but how good are we at actually achieving it? And even more sort of fundamentally, where is the right place to start there? So before I hand over to Pratishtha, I'd just like to share a little bit of information about her. She's an experienced user researcher and service designer with a focus on inclusive design. So she's definitely on the right topic. Pratishtha has a business and design background. She thrives at the intersection of human needs, storytelling, and problem solving. The goal is to design solutions that empower people with varied capabilities and drive impact. She is also the founder of Inclusivity, so that's IN-Inclusivity, which aims at spreading awareness and creating space for having conversations about inclusive design. Their mission is to develop supportive environments, products, and systems by designing for the needs for all people. So fantastic, noble cause. I'm very keen to hear what you have to say, Pratishtha. So over to you.
Well, thank you so much for your introduction. And also thank you so much to everyone who is watching my presentation today. We'll be catching up later on. I am delighted to be a part of this conference and share the stage with people who are so passionate about inclusive design and are at the core of driving the change. Also, a special thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to be part of ID24. As you have already heard, I'm Pratishtha Sharma, the founder of Inclusivity, an inclusive design agency based in India. My journey towards inclusive design began while I was researching for my master thesis and was trying to find answers for questions like who are we designing for, who fits the profile, and who is being left out of the design process unintentionally, and how does the current design process takes into account the diversity of users. So throughout this talk, I will be sharing some of my learnings that I've gathered through primary and secondary research while combining them in the end to derive a tool that would empower designers in incorporating inclusion in their current design process and act as a starting point towards inclusive design. So let's begin. We are currently living in a world of a rapidly aging population with a broader range of physical and cognitive abilities than ever before. According to the World Health Organization report on disability, more than 1 million people, 1 billion people, or 15% of the world's population experience some form of disability. And 1/5 of the estimated global total, or between 110 million and 119 million people, experience significant disabilities. In today's world, all persons with all types of disabilities should and must enjoy all human rights and fundamental freedoms on an equal basis with others. And in order to achieve it, inclusive design can act as a catalyst. While inclusive design originated as a response to the shortcomings for mass production, and particularly in the second half of the 20th century, in that era of rapid economic expansion, architects and professional designers working on product and service development tended to treat people as universal types rather than individuals. An important text of the period for designers, The Measure of Man by the American industrial designer Henry Dreyfuss, established the study of anthropometrics, the dimension of scale, including arm and leg reach, as an essential tool for designers. Henry measured hundreds of men, women, and children and calculated mean averages and dimensional ranges intended to underpin design decision for mass production. This actually gave rise to one size fits all approach, which allowed for the volume production of affordable goods that fueled the growth of consumerism. Great social and economic benefits ensure that the majority of people, but those who did not conform in terms of height, weight, cognitive, or sensory capacity, or physical strength, became vulnerable to design exclusion. They did not measure up to assumptions about what is average or what is considered to be normal, and as a consequence, the needs of those people were not addressed through the mainstream mass production. Well, gradually, however, a powerful reaction grew up against this stigmatizing approach in the design profession. It began slowly at first, then catalyzed by a few charismatic individuals, but built up into a vocal movement to integrate older and disabled people into the mainstream of everyday life through a more inclusive approach to the design of products, services, and environment. A new message was proclaimed in these areas that these groups were not special cases with special needs, but people whose requirements should be considered and incorporated at every stage of the design process. So this actually made a shift towards a more enlightened view that people are not disabled by their own impairments, irrespective of the shortcomings of design, but included or excluded by social attitudes and the quality of design, irrespective of their capability. As a consequence, a whole movement arose around the development of special needs design to bridge this widening gap outside the mainstream late in the 20th century design. This movement was actually further fueled globally when in 2001, the World Health Organization redefined the definition of disability as a mismatched interaction between a person's capability and the features of the environment which they live in. While prior to this, it had been observed that there was no neutral language with which we can discuss disability. Part of that difficulty of defining disability had to do the fact that concept of disability is multidimensional and very complicated. Disability had been described from numerous perspectives, including medical, economic, social, political, and administrative. But for this particular talk and this particular context, the two basic models, primary models, the medical and the social model would be taken into consideration. In the medical model, someone is seen as being disabled because they have something wrong with them due to a medical condition. The medical model of disability defines an illness or disability as the result of physical condition which is intrinsic to the individual. That is, the medical model actually sees the disability as a part of the individual's own body, and which may reduce the individual's quality of life and cause disadvantages to this individual. While on the other hand, the social model of disability is understood as a problematic interaction between an individual who has specific functional requirement and an environment that is designed without taking that requirement into the consideration. The social model actually aims to normalize the society so that it considers, plans, and designs for the needs of people and becomes as inclusive as possible. Thus, the social model operates on the premise that disability is a social construct, the results of society's failure to keep the persons with disabilities in mind when designing and constructing venues for activity and participation. Therefore, design should look at ways to remove the barriers that would restrict life choices for disabled people. As through design, humans both remove barriers and develop supportive environments, products, and systems to facilitate the achievement of their goals. Design should be considered for more than its aesthetics, which is primarily a surface effect. Its fundamental purpose is to change the form of the organization of a material world and even change how we interact with it. And when a design does remove barrier, disabled people can be independent and equal in society with choice and control over their whole life. This does not mean that the personal aspects of disability prioritized in the medical model are denied. Instead, they are framed in a more balanced perspective that places them in the social context. As design nowadays is not just as a process to create physical products, but increasingly also as a process that leads to the creation of any type of intervention, and it is often considered an important strategic resource for vehicle of change. Simply put, design actually shapes our ability to access, participate in, and contribute to the world. And with the emergence of inclusive design, also came a transference of responsibility from the user of design to the be it product, service, or environment to the design process itself. If designers if the designers and the organization that commissioned them did not accept the responsibility for what happens when people try to use their design, the outcome would be exclusion by design. The fault would not lie with the user or consumer, but with the designer himself. So, what happened with the origin of inclusive design and the World Health Organization when they changed their definition regarding disability was the responsibility actually shifted from the design, from the users of the products and services to the people who are actually designing those gate points for the people so that they could participate in or could be left out of the process. So before we move ahead and understanding in the terms of what is the starting point of inclusive design, it is important that we understand what actually inclusion and inclusive design mean. As the meaning of inclusion is by no means clear and it perhaps means different things to different people. But what does it really mean to have a system that is inclusive? And who is thought to be need of this inclusive design? And if design processes should be inclusive, then what practices is it contesting and what shared values is it advocating and by what criteria the success of inclusive design should be judged? As it does not merely mean that inclusion means different thing for different people, but instead that inclusion may end up meaning everything and nothing at the same time. Therefore, which makes it hard to implement. Despite the fact inclusion at its core mean is the idea of giving all citizens a chance to participate equally in economic, social, political, and cultural life. Building on it, inclusive design actually focuses on exploring ways of serving a full spectrum of people who make up a diverse environment. This may involve different solutions or processes for different groups of people rather than a one size fits all approach. This sentiment is actually perfectly captured by an inclusive design leader called Susan Goldsman. That inclusive design doesn't mean that you're designing one thing for all people. You're designing a diversity of ways to participate so that everyone has a sense of belonging. And at inclusivity, we adhere to this definition particularly because it not only takes into account the diversity voices of the people, but it also takes into account that there should be a sense of belonging once the design has been designed for those people. As a result, inclusive design also aspires to benefit every member of the society as it promotes accessible and usable products, services, and environment, because no person actually operates with full capability for every activity throughout the duration of his or her lifetime. Accessibility or usability can be affected by, for example, a medical injury or condition that could be temporary, long-term, or permanent, or unfamiliarity with a product or environment, a lack of understanding that if possibly you are in a foreign country and you do not understand the language of that country, that actually excludes those groups. Or it could be a physical attribute, height or size, when a doorbell to a home is been kept at a particular height, it actually excludes people who might be using wheelchairs or also people who do not have those abilities in terms of their height, and so on and so forth. While an inclusive design approach aims to provide a design that takes into account these physical, behavioral, and other factors, it appreciates that at some point during some activity, every person might experience some form of limitation in their ability. However, it should be added the hypothetical person who does not experience a disability in the broadest sense of the word during his or her lifetime will also benefit if we design inclusively, because what inclusive design creates is a positive user experience of intuitive and a straightforward design. That's the reason that inclusive design just does not benefit people who have disability, but it benefits everyone who is a part of the society, irrespective of what their abilities is. Often it is also considered that inclusive design, in order to design inclusively, there is a range of checklists and standards and guidelines suggested by many experts as a way to guide designers to address the needs of end users. For instance, the Worldwide Consortium has developed standards and guidelines for designing accessible websites. Handing a designer a set of instructions, many of which are intended to inform a final product that's constructed by someone else, usually doesn't work. Where inclusive design is understood as merely the functional response to people's needs and the limits of those needs is defined by legislation or codes of practice, the results are sterile and lifeless environments. So when the design process is limited in this way, the design professionals see it as a threat to good design, where the results are worthy but aesthetically dull. Therefore, we need to give designers a look at all the ways their work can go wrong when it's implemented and give them tools to define a more robust set of requirements for product teams to build. Inclusive design is actually a sort of yes and approach. That is, good to have these compliance guidelines, but they alone cannot make a difference as they conveniently leave out the major details, as they are not talking about writing for different cultures, subcultures, or inclusive language pronouns. They do not have the context in which design is being operated and things like that. Therefore, these guidelines are a good starting point for government and legal purposes, but we need to add on to these layers by adding on different cultures, subcultures, and different contexts to the design that we are designing and putting out in the world. Also, like we talk about that inclusive design should be considered at the very beginning of the design process because the cost to implement inclusive design increases the later it is introduced. Design that is not inclusive can lead to complaints, legal changes, planning delays, and costly retrofits as the product or service matures. Poor design can actually negatively impact the brand reputation. Designers should recognize that when accessibility issues are add-on, it is too late. Designers needs to consider the impact of technology and business decisions on people from the very beginning so that we design in fair and ethical ways for both the brand and the end of the human user. It is a tall order. The impact of inclusive design is more than just making the products that people use. It is about creating products that people love to use. As designers, having inclusivity anchor our decisions help to address and direct our ever evolving practice. It is a practicing true design thinking by reframing the opportunity. We come to understand that who is being excluded, and as a result, we can better understand people's problems and craft design, which helps them to make informed decisions for themselves and by extension, live better lives. Every design decision that a designer actually makes either raises or lowers the barrier for the people who are using the product, service, environment, or experience that we have created. This means that as designers, we have the privilege and the burden of wielding more power to influence humanity than ever before. Our knowledge, our awareness, and our values are baked into every user journey, push notification, and every glowing icon that we create. So we need to be mindful of the design decisions that we take in the team. This observation is that the disability is actually designed, whether it is an oversight or a lack of consideration at the design team by the design team, but the fact that some experience is not accessible was designed into the building of the product or this experience. What happens is it leads to exclusion, and it happens by the conscious series of choices that we make as designers, and that we as designers actually put those gate points in. And inclusive design is not a new type of design, but it is an intentional project that sets out to include significant sectors of society that are all too frequently ignored or overlooked. A design should be considered good only when it reflects the diversity of people who use it and does not impose barriers of any kind. Therefore, design should also be judged by whether or not it achieves an inclusive environment. A design that does not do so is not good enough. Inclusive design is neither an entirely new genre of design nor a separate specialization. It is a way a designer needs to think. And researchers and designers over the years have emphasized over the fact that inclusion of broader groups of the population in the design of products, services, and environments, and consider that inclusive design should not be separate from good design, rather than it should be framed with a more generalist approach to designing. So we all know the benefits of inclusive design, like what are the challenges that designers face in order to practice it. One of the crucial ones is to take into account, like, where do designers start from actually, since we live in a world of a 7.8 billion people, where every person interacts with the environment in its own unique way. So how do you actually commence the process of inclusion? How do you know, like, this is the path that you need to start your inclusion journey from? Because if we start designing for the whole range of human diversity, not only would it be a complicated task, but also an unachievable one, as designing for everyone can see like an unsurmountable problem, like it's just too big. Even with good intentions, our awareness simply can't encompass the lived experience of everyone else. Apart from this, the research thus far has suggested that there also appears a fear of getting it wrong or getting a certain part of that community, as there always will be a time when a specific group of people are excluded by design, and as designers we need to make those trade-offs. It will always turn out that somebody's perspective has not been taken into account, or worse, has been harmed. A classic example for this is a curb cuts effect. While it addresses the needs of people in wheelchair and makes life more comfortable for people with trolley or pram, they actually cause problem for pedestrians who have vision impairment, who rely on sharp curve to detect the edge of the sidewalk. So once we have made those trade-offs, the other layer that we need to take into consideration is that people with disabilities are as varied as any users, and they come from a variety of backgrounds and have varied interests, likes and dislikes, goals and skills. It is similar to the case that every single human will experience the world differently. We have different expectations and different preferences. Each person actually uses different interaction techniques, different adaptive strategies, and different assistive technology configuration. Therefore, it is important as designers that we careful not to assume that feedback from one person with a disability actually applies to all people with disabilities. Doesn't a person with a disability doesn't necessarily know how other people with the same disability interact with products, nor they know enough about other disabilities to provide valid guidance on other accessibility issues. Just as we would not make design decisions based on feedback from just one user, we should also not make accessibility design decisions based only on the recommendations of one person with disability. What works for one person might not work for everyone with that disability or for people with other disabilities. We need to remember that people are diverse, and we need to be careful not to assume that all users, including users with disabilities, use our product in the same way or operate in the same environment as it was designed by in the design team. The key to design inclusively is to incorporate excluded communities, recognize that who is most excluded from using a solution, and then bring them into the heart of the design process. People who navigate mismatched interactions every day by their lives will contribute ingenuity and deep expertise with regards to how to solve such design challenges. For example, there are many teams in technology sector that are working on the design of voice-based interfaces. There are also communities of people who have been using speech commands to control computer interfaces for much of their lives, often because they are unable to use a keyboard. Bringing people with those experiences into the design process can lead to invaluable insights into how to build great voice-based experiences for everyone. The point is when we design a solution that works well across different demographics, different life stages, and different abilities, it starts to stretch how we think about and how who can be benefited from that solution. And recognizing exclusion will not only lead to a better design that would serve a wider audience, but it would also act as a source of innovation for the designers. There are endless examples to support this, like the typewriter, flexible straw, and finger work. The most recent one would be an Xbox adaptive controller. The Xbox adaptive controller was designed with the help of Mark Burley, which is a disabled Air Force veteran who injured his spinal cord in 1996. And he was playing video game with one of his friends. Suddenly, her right hand stopped working, and she did not regain mobility for months. And Bartlett was actually deeply affected by this experience, and then he started mailing a lot of game companies to ask for modified controllers and another assistive tech that would help them to play the game with his friends. Later on, what happened was a lot of companies were not designing accessibility for accessible remote control gaming controller, which led to founding of Able Gamers, an organization that advocates for accessible gaming options. And later also he collaborated with Microsoft with designing gaming options for people with limited ability. So this actually motivated my interest in designing and developing a tool that would help designers understand the user design interaction in a broader context, and furthermore make them mindful of like who is being excluded from using the solution. It could also serve as an actionable starting point for designers to either innovate or open up their design solutions for people with diverse needs and capabilities. So at Inclusivity, we had designed the user mapping canvas, and the user mapping canvas is actually a visual representation of the user's abilities, which is required to interact with the design. We need this actually first to understand and then design products, services, and environments that do not exclude, but instead reflect more accurately the diverse demands of today's user, particularly older and disabled people. The canvas actually contains 7 elements: purpose, phases, user journey steps, context, task analysis, objective, requirements, which is further divided into 2, physical and abilities. Let's take a look at each of these elements and how these elements can actually help us in designing inclusively. The first element for the design for the user mapping canvas is purpose. Purpose is actually required to lay down the goal of using this canvas, as this canvas could be used at any stage of the human-centered design process. At the very beginning, to identify opportunities and gaps in the currently designed solution, and at the ideate stage to like understand the user capabilities required to interact with the prototype, and also at the end of the design process to make conscious design choices of either including or excluding people. The next element is phases. Journey phases are the different level stages in the journey of the user interacting with the product or service. The stages will vary from scenario to scenario, organization to organization, based on their goal of using this canvas. Well, according to a research report released by Purple, a disability organization championing accessible shopping showed that 75% of the disabled people of all ages have had to leave a store or website in the past because they were unable to finish a purchase due to their disability. Hence, it is crucial to have a distinction between different stages of a user journey, as each stage would require different set of tasks expected of the user to interact with it. For example, an online grocery shopping site would require a user to navigate an online platform while ordering. However, the user is also required to be physically able to receive the groceries in person when the order arrives. The actions required at the start of the service therefore differ from the other actions later in the consumer experience or the user journey. Therefore, to cover all bases, it is essential to list every possible experience that the user may encounter to identify the diversity of user needs, as each of these design choices would either lower or raise the barrier for participation. So in order to create a truly inclusive product or service, we need to take care of the complete journey, each element throughout the process, but at the same time, we need to start somewhere. Therefore, selecting a particular phase will provide the necessary direction that we are looking for. To better understand the canvas, let's select placing an order on the online grocery shopping app as one of the phase. The next element in the user mapping canvas is the user journey steps. It is the broad review of a product's features coupled with a detailed task-based interaction analysis to highlight potential usability and accessibility issues. It actually includes the series of steps a user needs to take to interact with the service. So the user journey steps for placing an order will be opening up of the application, browsing deals and offers, searching for the products, looking through the search results, finding the products, searching the quantity they need, adding those products into the cart, and repeating the process till all the items of their list of the online grocery is been there, and then proceed to checkout and make payment. So these are the various user journey steps a person needs to take in order to get the groceries delivered at their home. The next element in this is the context. Context or environment includes anything that may affect the use of a given product or system. As human competencies interact with the environment in a dynamic, reciprocal relationship that shapes performance. Therefore, to create a good design, it is vital to understand the context the user is in. As if there is no environmental support, the distance between the person, between what the person can do and what the environment affords, creates a barrier that limits social participation. Also, at the same time, context is quite tricky topic that evades attempts to define it too tightly. Some definitions cover just the immediate surroundings of the interaction. Instead, to design inclusively, we need to take into consideration the physical, digital, social, psychological structures that surround the point of the user. The physical and the social environments take into account the family, institutions, community, geography, built environment, cultural, the economic system, and the political climate. Added to this conceptualization of the environment is also one's intrapersonal or psychological environment, which includes internal states like beliefs, cognition, expectancies, and other mental states. Taking the example ahead that we are talking about to understand the canvas better is like in the example of online grocery shopping. COVID-19 pandemic has actually accelerated the change in psychology of grocery shoppers. The factors that needs to be taken into consideration while designing are the health and safety factors, high level of stress throughout amongst people as they were not able to get their groceries and necessities on time, economic stability since the world was in a complete lockdown situations, so were able to afford groceries or not, and so on and so forth. The next element in the user journey mapping is the task analysis. Task analysis is a process by which detailed information is written down across the whole journey about what the users are required to do in terms of action or cognitive processes to achieve a task, objective, or goal. More simply, it is the use to gain an understanding of what people needs to do in the task or the jobs they need to carry out. The difficulty of each task step is then assessed in terms of their cognitive, sensory, and motion capability a person would need to carry out that step. It mainly includes the amount of information the user needs to remember, walkthrough of images and offers, review items in the cart, and change the quantity and navigate themselves throughout the payment gateway, etc. Objective is the end result of each stage as we require to do task on each step. So what is the goal of what is the end result of that each step so that the person can move ahead in the journey. It includes the gate points that the team has designed which the user needs to clear in order to move ahead. It is crucial to understand that the gate points, as one identified, the design team could later actually create diversity of ways to participate for people with different abilities that were not able to continue the journey because of some sort of abilities that were required but were not present amongst people. The next element is the requirements. As the requirements interplay between the product's demand and user's capability in the context of particularly activity or task determines the level of exclusion experienced by that user. For example, a product which has been placed on the top of a shelf in the supermarket may be inaccessible to users due to their height or their ability to reach the shelf. The same product placed lower down is likely to be more accessible. Similarly, an application that only operates on a certain device or only accepts certain online payments restricts the user participation. Therefore, the requirements have been further divided into physical requirements and abilities, because we needed to take into consideration the spectrum of user product interaction challenges from total as well as to partial exclusion to difficulty or frustration for those users who are not being included in the design. It also shows the fact that demands and capabilities may change with time, with variation both in the long term due to aging on and the short term, for example, due to changes within a daily cycle of the human. The physical requirements includes anything from personal computers, the internet speed, emails, mobile phones, special payment, more broadband media connections, socio-economic background, language skills, transportation facilities that would play an essential role while interacting with the products and services. While abilities, on the other hand, includes personal factors that may affect the individual's ability to use a product or system. We have further divided the abilities into 6 categories based on the World Health Report on Disability by the World Health Organization to provide a better picture of what we mean when we talk about abilities. The first ability is vision. It actually refers to the ability of the user to clearly see high contrast information in an image. In a simple term, it means the ability to see the reading text of various sizes and recognizing a friend from a various distance. Next is dexterity. Dexterity is the ability to make coordinated hand and finger movements to grasp and manipulated objects. So in order to access the online grocery shopping app, the person needs to have dexterity so that he could move easily around the application with its phone, with its hand. The next is hearing. Hearing or auditory perception is the ability to perceive sounds, detecting vibrations, change in the pressure. It is, in simple term, it is like understanding speech against various levels of background noises and detecting sounds of various volume. Next is thinking. Thinking abilities are the mental activities that one uses to process information, make connections, make decisions, and create new ideas. For example, understanding or expressing written language, recalling things from memory, or remembering to do things in the future, holding attention and processing information with clarity incorporates thinking. Communication skills allows one to understand and be understood by others. This can include, but are not limited to, effectively communicate ideas to others, actively listening in conversations, and giving them critical feedback. The last ability is the mobility. Mobility is defined as the potential for movement and the ability to get from one place to another using one or more modes of transportation to meet their daily needs. Once the team has sketched the abilities that is required by the user to interact with the design with the help of user mapping canvas, it is also important to stand back and analyze the design choices that we have created. And in order to do so, we need to stand back and ask ourselves certain questions that could help us in understanding the design choices that we have made. Therefore, we have added cards for inclusion to accompany the user mapping canvas. The first card for inclusion states like, how do I find a way to invite those people into the design process? As in disability world, there are standards and guidelines that alone cannot make a difference. Therefore, it makes sense to include people who will be profoundly impacted by our design choices. Simply put, if you're designing something for a particular person with specific disability, if we are establishing standards for them, or if it is imperative to let them have a voice in the design process. I believe the powerful phrase, "nothing about us without us," captures its essence perfectly. So once the user mapping canvas is done, we need to sit back with the rest of the design team and contemplate, like, if we are excluding certain sort of people, how do we invite them into the design process? The second question which could help in analyzing the design choices is, what were my assumptions about the user or process which were being challenged? As design decisions are generally influenced by a lot of information, some of it comes from the best practices in the field, often imposed as design standards, and some from the experiences of the designers and implementers. Those standards and experiences suggest configurations to prefer in different situations, and which leads to preferences being formed. As designers, we tend to assume that the design would be operated in normal situations. We tend to make assumptions about that the match between the current design situation and one where our chosen technique has worked well before. Design reuse actually can violate assumption, as conditions that were true or were assumed to be true originally may no longer be the case in the new design context. Therefore, the standards should evolve as the surroundings and complexities of human does over a period of time. The third card into this is the solution designed for a person who has similar abilities as me, or does it differ? More often, design reflects the ability of the design team. This leads to biasness, like ability bias is when designers design things that they themselves can see, hear, touch, or the solution only work for people with similar circumstances, but it often ends up in excluding people with different abilities. Ability bias can also lead to designs that don't work for people with disabilities, for anyone who is temporarily injured, or anyone who moves into a different environment that affects their abilities, like trying to hear in a loud airport or speaking on a quiet train ride. As designers, we must constantly keep in check that our own biases and question ourselves often about our assumptions while we are designing something. What are the pinpoints which are unfair or restricting the users to participate in? As designers, we need to think beforehand about the different requirements someone must meet to participate in our designs. Depending on a design aims and procedures, this could include a participant's certain age, group, or a brand of phone, or gender. Our responsibility is to determine which criteria is actually crucial for our participants to meet to interact with the design effectively, or on the other hand, the exclusion criteria should list the features of a person that of meeting immediately deems that person ineligible to participate. The exclusion criteria consist of qualities about a person or the external factors around them that would go against a design's goal or interfere with it. The best way is to just list down the factors that are enabling a person to not participate into a design, and then ask ourselves the question, is the criteria that has been set is necessary, or can we remove, or could we provide alternative ways for people to come into the design process? The next
Hi,
question.
Pratishta, this is Thomas. Just want to let you know we have about 6 minutes left, so just be aware so we have a little time for Q&A as well. Thank you.
And the second last card for us is, how could we make an adaptation to the current system to make it better? Every design decision actually designer makes either lower or raises the barrier for the people using the product, service, and environment or experiences that we have created. Even though inclusion is an ongoing process where there is no finish line, there possibly won't be a solution that would work better for every individual. Therefore, designers needs to acknowledge that fact and then move forward to either build a new design altogether or find alternative ways for those people to participate in. Well, the last card in this series is, what is in my capacity that I can do to move a design to process towards inclusion? Like the spheres of influence, which is a set of concentric circles, which is the strongest near the center and weaker as the distance from the center increases, every person or designer involved in decision making should look for ways where they as an individual could contribute and make a difference rather than rely on top management to impose certain rules or regulation. And it basically starts by educating ourselves and reflecting on our design practice. And we need to do this regularly and make actionable plans to make those progress. As designers, we create the context for people's life. We have the transformative power. If we choose, but apparently we live in a world in which human diversity is not celebrated but threatened. And as designers or gatekeepers, it falls under our realm to speak about inclusion in design. It becomes our shared responsibility to find ways to open up the process and invite the people with varied capabilities in order to make informed design choices. Part of what is important for us about it is that it communicates that inclusion is a continuous process and that there is no holy grail in this world. We need to be constantly be responding to new information about who is left out of the process, and we need to do about how our bodies and brains work so that we constantly involve and create a world which is more equitable and inclusive at the end. That will be all from my side.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Very much. Yes. Sorry, Thomas. Is it you or is it me?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Brent. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, take it away.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Batista. Very interesting. Huge amount to think about in there. And a little bit of a Slack discussion going on. So I think I'll just share a few thoughts, try and formulate a question from that. On the sort of practical side, I think we're wondering how many, is there a way to kind of to identify, almost like super personas? I mean, you had your sort of 6 abilities that you referenced there.
Yeah.
Considering, people enter into research, there's a budget there, there's recruitment, there's a lot of formalities that go on. And I mean, beyond just identifying the correct people to include. So, how would we go about that process? How many people would be including in our research? And how do we know that we're ticking the right boxes with their abilities as personas?
While abilities were actually kept into the user mapping canvas to give them and give the design team a better understanding of the personas do, what sort of abilities are actually present and what sort of information one needs to process that. One good way to check all the boxes in this situation would be to consider people with different abilities. Apart from them, consider people in different contexts or different environmental factors as well. Like if you're selecting a person who is for the example that we have been talking about throughout the presentation is the online grocery shopping app.
Yeah.
So if the person ordering it from their comfort of a home, or they're placing an order from a metro station because they are in a way to hurry and they needs to get their grocery delivered at the end of the day. So those contexts, once we open up, apart from the abilities that we are taking into account, would give you a wider picture of how the design would operate in a system rather than into a single process or into just a comfort of a home.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if this is coincidence or someone's curated this perfectly, but I actually work for a retailer, groceries as well as general merchandising. So, I mean, you talked about the pandemic and just an example of how an end-to-end journey can break with this sort of pandemic external influence was the people ordering deliveries to their door and being used to the delivery driver being able to bring their shopping in, whether they didn't have the strength or they didn't have the dexterity or able to go out and collect the shopping from the driver. And because of the restrictions around COVID, that wasn't possible anymore. I think it's just one example of how things of how that end-to-end can break. So I'm very familiar with the need to have an end-to-end view on things. But I think the idea of research is really key here, because I think that I was wondering actually whilst you were talking, and I'm wondering previously, should user research actually be entirely focused on people with disabilities, thinking about, extreme ends of the spectrum? Do you need to, so you think about vision as someone who's fully sighted versus someone who's completely blind. Do you really need to include other people in between? As I say that, I'm thinking about low vision and font scaling, so maybe it doesn't fly. But I'm just wondering, so much of user research is sort of, we throw out studies to the general population, and what's the value in that from an inclusive design perspective? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, adding on to it, it would be interesting if we consider just not the opposite ends of the spectrum, but rather than people throughout this spectrum, because like we said, or I mentioned previously as well, that each individual with or without disabilities interact in a complete different manner with the design. So in order to understand that context, we need to keep throughout the people. If the person is using assistive technology, they might have created different hacks for it. Like if you talk to people who are disabled, they create their own hacks so that
for
they
sure.
can interact with their design. And each of those hacks are actually a source for, could be used as a source for innovation. And once you design through that, then it could work for people across average people or the people who are who do not have disabilities, but that could be a one way to go towards as well. But my advice, or like the area that I would suggest, is like consider people throughout that spectrum if you do not want to miss. And like you said, that user research too has a certain sort of budget and time limit as well. So as designers, we need to be like conscious of like making those trade-offs. It is not something that we need to consider at the end. We need to, like, before we release that design into the outer world, we need to be aware that we understand that we are excluding a certain group of people, because right now we do not have that budget, or we do not have that resources available with us in the organization. And then later on provide a diversity of ways for them to get included once you have that revenue, or once you have that resources with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I think the we've got
hey,
to hand back to Thomas now.
Yeah, we got to wrap here.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, both Pratishtha, for your presentation, and also thank you, Bren, as co-host here. We want to end here saying thanks everyone for joining the talk today. If you like this session, hit the YouTube like button. Don't forget you can subscribe to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24. Tell your friends about it. A reminder that our community on Twitter, #ID24, is a respectful community, and you can find our code of conduct on the Inclusive Design 24 website. We want to thank so much to our sponsors and supporters: Intopia, Fable, TPGI ARC, Adobe, Tetralogical, Intuit, InfoAxia, Center for Inclusive Design, Web Directions AAA, Adrian Roselli LLC, and Can I Access? So we will be coming back right at the top of the hour with our next session, and look forward to seeing you then. And thanks again, everyone, for being here.